Hello, this is Jane, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the December 18 issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The first article is from the front page, and it's under the byline of Education, and the title reads, Province Unveils New Kindergarten Curriculum for Fall. Shift from play-based learning elicits concerns from experts. And this is by Kristen Rashowi. Ontario's new kindergarten curriculum changes how kids will be taught to read, add fractions and coding to math, and even covers basic navigational skills. These expectations for the province's youngest learners have been touted as a more back-to-basics approach and will be implemented next fall, with training for teachers to start in the new year. The curriculum was delayed earlier this year to give teachers more time to get familiar with the new material that still uses play-based learning. But critics said they have concerns about any move away from the play-based learning that is a hallmark of the province's full-day kindergarten program. We've had a very quick turnaround to try to digest what's in the curriculum document, and it does provide a little bit more clarity for some of our members on certain academic and curricular expectations, said David Maston, president of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. But it is maybe veering toward academic outcomes much more so than an emphasis on play-based learning, which he said is developmentally appropriate and helps build foundational, important skills in young children. Play-based inquiry is still a key part of the new curriculum, but with more direct instructional time required. A spokesperson for Education Minister Paul Calandra said the delay was specifically to provide educators with the time, training, and supports needed for effective implementation. The timeline ensures teachers have ample time to review the curriculum and prepare ahead of implementation, said Press Secretary Emma Testani. The changes will support each child in developing foundational reading, writing, and math skills while maintaining play-based learning that allows students to learn through play, she said. The updated lessons include specific targets for math, including counting and exploring number relationships to 20 and adding numbers to 10, phonics for reading, and giving and following directions. Coding will include a sequencing of steps, and it says students will conduct scientific investigations and engage in engineering design. The revamp is in part a response to a scathing Ontario Human Rights Commission report in 2022 that found the so-called discovery method for literacy was leaving a number of students struggling to read, especially those with learning disabilities, when research pointed to phonics and other direct methods. It is also intended to be a better match with the Grade 1 curriculum, which has also been updated. The province has promised monthly webinars for educators starting in February. Maston said he expects high-quality, comprehensive, job-embedded professional learning for both teachers and early childhood educators who team teach in full-day kindergarten classrooms. They deserve more than a webinar and a set of slides, and they must not be expected to complete this training on their own time, he added. In a memo released Wednesday, the Ministry of Education said the revamp will replace the current curriculum, which was introduced in 2016 for the 2026-27 school year. The kindergarten curriculum, 2026, uses age-appropriate and evidence-based teaching methods. It takes a student-centered approach in providing children with the knowledge and skills they will need to succeed in grade 1 and beyond. Report card templates will also be updated, the ministry said. Shelley Mehta of the Early Childhood Programs at George Brown College and Toronto Metropolitan University said she worries the government is pivoting away from what really works with children, what works with their brain development and their age. We're kind of going backwards, added Mehta, who is also the Atkinson Center for Society and Child Development at the University of Toronto's Education faculty. Jim Grieve, a former director of education in Peel, who was the Assistant Deputy Minister of Education who oversaw the implementation of full-day kindergarten, said play-based is not just throwing a bunch of toys out and saying, let them explore. It is absolutely intentional play, which means the teacher and the ECE have worked together to ensure the play is developing numeracy and literacy skills. In Boston, play-based learning has been extended throughout the primary grades up to age 7 with much success, said early childhood researcher Carrie McQuaig. Boston's commitment to play-based early learning is impressive. So too are the results, including better results on standardized tests in math and literacy, said McQuaig of the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto and the Atkinson Center. Ontario should learn from that example, she said, adding the results have been remarkable, with evidence of a lasting impact continuing through their education and improving post-secondary outcomes. And the next article is also from the front page under the byline, Economy. City pushes to host new defense bank. Multinational agency to finance military spending would bring 3,500 jobs to region. This is by Rob Ferguson and Anna Pereira. Toronto is hoping to lure a new kind of bank to Bay Street, the Defense, Security, and Resilience Bank, as democratic nations boost military spending amid growing international tensions. Premier Doug Ford, Mayor Olivia Chow, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and Council of Ontario Universities are backing a push to host the global headquarters of the fledgling multinational bank, noting Toronto is the country's biggest financial services hub and the second largest in North America. For Toronto, this represents an opportunity to serve a critical role on the global stage while catalyzing investment and innovation, Chow said as the bid was launched. Known as the DSRB, the bank would be the first of its kind, bring 3,500 jobs, potentially lead to a larger domestic cluster of defense manufacturers and benefit-related companies across the country. We're known across the globe as one of the most welcoming, diverse, politically stable places on the planet, with more than 110 nationalities, Ford said at the TMX Market Center, where dozens of business types crowded a room with a giant stock ticker on the screen. We've already begun the process of finding office space that could be an interim home for the bank, and we will also work with the bank to find a permanent home here in Toronto. The bank's founding nations are expected to make a decision by the end of March on which country should be the host. In Canada, Montreal has also expressed interest. I think we're in a good spot going into those negotiations, and I look forward to the Prime Minister having a lot more to say in early January on this, said Kevin Reed, a veteran Canadian financial services executive who is president and chief operating officer of the International Development Group of experts launching the bank. The view is that the Pacific region would like North America. The European view would be perhaps towards Canada because of certain discussions within NATO, he added. So I think we're at a moment in history here where if we put our hand up high and do it fast, we will see a coalition of those other nations, and our vote to start negotiations absolutely support Canada. The bank would be owned by about 40 countries and is designed to provide long term, affordable capital for defense, security, and resilience investments. Its website says. Think munitions, equipment, and drones, which have become fixtures in Russia's war against Ukraine, along with military and security infrastructure such as cyber and logistics systems. The benefits would extend well beyond Bay Street, from aerospace in Montreal to cybersecurity in Vancouver, shipbuilding and maritime expertise in Halifax, energy and critical infrastructure in Calgary, and defense and security policy expertise in Ottawa, said Jeff Langweir of the Toronto Region Board of Trade. There has been reluctance in the private sector to invest in defense and security sectors under environmental, social, and governance policies, but that is changing as NATO countries, including Canada, have agreed to boost military spending to 5% of their gross domestic product. Within NATO, that means a boost to $4 trillion a year from $1.6 trillion now, said Reid. The bank intends to help governments streamline and finance purchases of defense equipment and systems with a multinational approach that clears the way for commercial banks to fund defense and security firms across the international supply chain more quickly. It complements national budgets by mobilizing public and private finance at scale, notes the website for the bank's development group, a coalition of leaders from the worlds of finance, defense, academia, and others, including former NATO and government officials. By bridging public and private finance, the DSR Bank gives allied democracies the financial strength to meet today's threats and prepare for tomorrow's. Supporting financial institutions to date include Deutsche Bank, Commerzbank, RBC, ING Group, and JP Morgan. The private sector partners have contributed seed capital to the DSRB's development group, according to a source familiar with the matter speaking confidentially to discuss internal matters. Member nations of the bank would sign and ratify a charter, provide upfront financial contributions, and promise backstops known as callable guarantees should they be necessary. Borrowings would reside on the balance sheet of the bank, not on individual nations, and provide a broader sharing of risk. That charter is being negotiated now. The model is not new. The bank notes it is used by the World Bank, the European Investment Bank, and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, among others. Toronto's bid points out that the city is home to a large talent pool, with 5 national banks, dozens of international banks, major pension funds, Canada's largest stock market, and regulators, which provide an essential foundation for a sovereign-backed institution that must maintain market confidence and rating strength over the long term. And before I go on, I'm going to quickly remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the next article is, again, it is on the front page, and it is under the bylines of demographics. Canada reports record drop in residents. Population declines by 76,000, caused in part by changes to foreign student rules. And this is by May Warren. Canada's population saw the largest decline on record in the third quarter of 2025, with a dip of 76,068 people, according to new data from Statistics Canada. The drop, which StatCan attributes to a decline in non-permanent residents, primarily international students, is larger than any other recorded since the agency began keeping records in 1946. While not necessarily unexpected, it could have impacts on both housing and the country's wider economy. Ontario, in particular, saw its biggest drop on record, almost 67,000 people. The country's population was 41,575,585 as of October 1, 2025, down 0.2% from July 1, as per numbers posted online Wednesday. The drop was caused in part by a cap on international students allowed into the country introduced by the federal government starting in 2024, which has resulted in a decline in enrollment at Ontario colleges and universities. The November federal budget contains plans to continue to limit new international student permits with a target of 150,000 next year, down from a prior target of 305,900. The federal government introduced policies in 2024 to slow international migration to Canada, and we're starting to see the impact of those in the data that we released today, said Stacy Hallman, an analyst at the Center for Demography at Statistics Canada. Because Canada is among the ultra-low fertility countries, fewer than 1.3 births per woman, the population is heavily impacted by international migration, Hallman noted. Canada's population dropped between the third and fourth quarters of 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic, with a decline of 1,232 people, a blip Hallman said was due to pandemic restrictions. In contrast, in the third quarter of 2023, during a period of federal policies aimed at attracting immigrants, the country saw its highest population growth since the second quarter of 1957, up 1%, equivalent to 418,634 people. Douglas Porter, chief economist at the Bank of Montreal, said the biggest impact of the population drop will be on housing. I appreciate this has been a matter of great debate. For about the last 4 or 5 years, we have come down on one side of this debate very heavily, he said. We have long been of the view that one of the reasons why affordability became such an issue across the country was in part due to the dramatic rise in population, especially after the pandemic. He added that while population growth is a building block of gross domestic product, that's GDP, growth and spending, it's not the only one. And over the short term, the bank finds zero correlation between population growth and economic growth. In terms of the broader economy, Robert Hogue, assistant chief economist at RBC, said he sees the population decline as headwinds and not necessarily tipping the overall economy into some kind of recessionary conditions. The bank is still expecting slow growth overall, but positive growth. Low interest rates and government spending in budgets will keep the economy, the Canadian economy, including Ontario's economy, afloat, he said. In Wednesday's release, Statistics Canada cites a 73,682 person drop in study permit holders and a 67,616 person drop in work and study permit holders. More than 47,000 of the study permit holders were in Ontario. The number of asylum claimants, protected persons, and related groups was up by 7,324 people in the third quarter of 2025. Permanent immigration numbers were also stable over the same time period. The numbers are considered estimates and will be updated. Rupa Banerjee, a professor at Toronto Metropolitan University, that's TMU, and Canada Research Chair of Economic Inclusion, Employment and Entrepreneurship of Canada's Immigrants, said the international student caps have had a huge impact on colleges and universities, particularly locally. Across the board in the GTA, you see a lot of, particularly the community college sector, basically having to shutter programs or reduce offerings because of this, she said. This not only impacts programs that had a lot of international students, but others that drew out of the central coffers of funding, she added. The changes are also having an impact on Canada's reputation as the place for the world's best and brightest, she added. Overall, our position as the top destination for students looking to study abroad comes into question. L.J. Valencia, an economist with Desjardins Group, said the drop in population, particularly in areas where there were a lot of international students, such as the Greater Toronto Area, should help ease rental housing demand. But he said in the long term, it could also lead to slower growth. If there's fewer people in general, that means that there are fewer people contributing to economic activity, he said. TMU's Banerjee said the drop in population was expected. But if it continues, it could have even more of an impact, with more broad ripple effects throughout the economy. And the next article is titled Canada-wide Car Theft Ring Busted. OPP-led probe leads to 20 arrests and recovers more than 300 stolen vehicles worth $25 million. And this is by Josh McGinnis. Hundreds of stolen vehicles bound for overseas markets have been recovered following a years-long investigation into dismantling a sophisticated and large-scale auto theft network operating in Ontario, police announced Wednesday. In total, 306 stolen vehicles with a combined value of $25 million were seized in the Ontario Provincial Police-led probe dubbed Project Chickadee, which also resulted in 20 arrests and 134 charges. The alleged criminal operation, which used multiple ports across Canada, was responsible for shipping mostly stolen luxury and high-end vehicles and SUVs to markets in the Middle East and West Africa, where the demand is high, OPP and Canada Border Services Agency officials told reporters at a joint press conference in Mississauga. Police also noted that the probe revealed the alleged criminal network had links to transnational organized crime groups. The investigation began in 2023 when OPP officers recovered 4 stolen vehicles in the Greater Toronto Area. What started as a local investigation uncovered a network of international reach, shipping stolen vehicles overseas to markets where they sell for double their Canadian value, OPP Commissioner Thomas Carrick said. This is organized crime on a global scale. According to authorities, the Government of Canada's Financial Intelligence Unit flagged suspicious transactions involving freight forwarding companies. The CBSA then used that information to intercept containers carrying stolen vehicles at shipping ports in Montreal, Vancouver, and Halifax. Evidence from the seizures pointed to a sophisticated criminal network involving registered freight forwarding companies using fraudulent documentation, OPP Detective Inspector Scott Wade said. In October and November, search warrants were executed in Toronto and surrounding cities, including Brampton and Mississauga, as well as one in Quebec, for dozens of residences, industrial sites, and vehicles. In addition to the vehicles, authorities recovered more than $190,000 in cash, 3 firearms, and industrial equipment such as forklifts. Wednesday's announcement comes amid a surge in auto thefts across the province in recent years. More than 30,000 vehicles were stolen in Ontario in 2023, while stolen vehicle claims now account for more than $1 billion in insurance losses annually across Canada, according to CARIC. But of the 20 individuals who were charged, 9 were held for bail. 6 are still in custody, while 3 have been released on conditions. Brian Gast, Vice President of Investigative Services at Equite Association, said that while there are encouraging signs auto thefts are starting to trend downward, Canada, and specifically Ontario, remains a source country for stolen vehicles. Ontario's large population, high volume of targeted vehicles, and its proximity to the eastern ports make it especially vulnerable to auto theft. Although the majority of recovered stolen vehicles were luxury models, some found during the investigation were commonly owned Hondas and Toyotas, Wade noted. In November, Equite Association released its list of the most stolen vehicles in 2024, with several Honda and Toyota SUVs and crossovers leading the pack, along with Ford and Ram pickup trucks. And the next article is titled Charity Donations Hit 20-Year Low in 2023. Just 16.8% of taxpayers gave money, data shows. And this is by Liban Osman. A new study has found a massive decline in generosity in Canada as the share of Canadians donating to charity has hit the lowest level since in 20 years. Research done by the Fraser Institute, the Canadian public policy think tank, reveals just 16.8% of Canadian taxpayers donated to charity in the tax year 2023, with total donations amounting to just 0.52% of aggregate income. That's down from 21.9% of Canadian taxpayers donating a decade earlier in 2013, and an even further decline from 2003, when just under a quarter of tax filers donated to charity, with donations making up 0.69% of total income. Grady Monroe, a political analyst at the Fraser Institute, says the cost of living is likely one of the reasons behind the decline. He cautioned that the study doesn't say for sure what's behind the long-term decline, but we certainly know that when people find it hard to make ends meet, they might choose to give last to charity, said Monroe. Age and religious affiliation are also associated with the level of generosity within a population, he said. The provinces with the biggest drop in donations over the decade were Prince Edward Island, with a 31.4% decrease, Saskatchewan, 29.9%, and Nova Scotia, 28.4% decrease. In 2023, Manitoba was the province that had the highest percentage of taxpayers who donated to charity at 18.7%. Ontario ranks second with 17.2%, and Quebec was not far behind at 17.1%. New Brunswick, meanwhile, was lowest with 14.4%. This has been a long-standing trend. Manitoba has been the most ostensibly generous province in Canada for some time now, said Monroe. In 2013, Manitoba was leading the way as well. In terms of the average dollar value of annual charitable donations, Alberta came first at $3,622, while Quebec was last at $1,194, less than half the national average of $2,532. Monroe noted that Ontario is on the generous side in the 2023 ranking, but just like the rest of the country, the province has seen a decline. Ultimately, the effect of that is that charities across the country will have a harder time getting the resources they need to help their communities, said Monroe. Gina Haggett, the Salvation Army's Director for Public Relations in Ontario, said every charity is feeling the effect as they've seen a dramatic decline in funding as needs now outweigh the support from Canadians. A national report from Salvation Army in October found a growing number of Canadians are struggling to stay afloat, with people feeling less confident in their financial future. Canadians are feeling the impact of the increased prices on the shelves, and they're just getting by. And those that aren't are coming to the Salvation Army, said Haggett. The organization is currently in the middle of its Christmas Kettle campaign to provide programs and services for those in need across Ontario. All we ask is if you can't give up your financial resources, please give up your time and give generously, because every penny and time allotted helps those in your own community to become more stable. The study is based on the Fraser Institute's annual Generosity Index, which uses data from Statistics Canada. And I need to stop once more to remind you you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the next article is titled, Most Canadians Still Trust Vaccines. Poll finds that 74% believe in safety and effectiveness. And this is by Nicole Ireland. A new poll says that about 3/4 of Canadian adults still have confidence in vaccines, but hesitancy has increased over the past 5 years. The survey, conducted by Ledger Healthcare and released on Tuesday, says 74% of respondents said they were either very confident, that's 42%, or somewhat confident, that was 32%, in the safety and effectiveness of vaccines. But about a quarter of the respondents said they were less confident than they were before. People aged 65 and older were the most enthusiastic about immunization and trusting of information available to them, while 30% of those between 18 and 34 reported a drop in confidence. People expressed the most hesitancy around the COVID-19 and flu vaccines. The main drivers of vaccine hesitancy, according to healthcare providers polled, are concerns about safety, that's 61%, misinformation from social media influencers, that's 53%, and mistrust in institutions, and that was 48%. According to members of the public poll, the top factors influencing their willingness to get a vaccine were their perception of the effectiveness of the vaccine in avoiding serious effects of the virus, that was 63%, severity of symptoms or risk of death from the virus, that was 60%, and safety of the vaccine and likelihood of being exposed to the virus, both 54%. The results come as health officials urge people to get the flu shot amid a dramatic rise in cases and children's hospitalizations, including 3 deaths in Ontario. Clear, transparent, and consistent communication about the risks and benefits of vaccines are critical to building trust, which can be difficult when people are getting information or misinformation from so many sources, including social media, said Millicent Lavers Sally, Vice President of Research at Ledger Healthcare. Information over the last 5 years about vaccines has become more fragmented, she said. If everybody is saying something different, it is confusing, and it makes sense that you would be less confident in what you're hearing. 49% of the respondents said they were very comfortable with the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, that's the MMR vaccine, with another 20% saying they are somewhat comfortable. 16% said they were either not at all comfortable or somewhat uncomfortable with the MMR vaccine, while another 15% said they didn't know. Dr. Zainab Abdurrahman, president of the Ontario Medical Association, said although she's encouraged that 74% of Canadians continue to trust vaccines, the poll shows healthcare providers need to ask patients about their specific concerns and address them. Given the recent measles outbreaks, it shows that even a small drop in MMR confidence is a huge concern, said Abdurrahman, who is an allergist and clinical immunologist. The measles vaccine is one of the safest and most effective tools we have, and we need to reinforce that. So we have to be able to have these conversations and acknowledge that there is medical misinformation out there. The number one source of information about vaccines is a family doctor or nurse practitioner, the poll said, followed by Canadian government or public health websites. The next article is under the byline of trade war. CUSMA will survive. Carney says Trump wants to renegotiate pact so Canada is dependent on U.S., a goal PM will reject. This is by Tonda McCharles. Ottawa. U.S. President Donald Trump wants the relationship with Canada to be one of dependence on the United States and is not talking about ripping up the Trilateral Free Trade Pact, but renegotiating it, says Prime Minister Mark Carney. In a pair of French-language interviews marking the year's end, Carney revealed for the first time details of his private conversation this month with Trump and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum on the sidelines of the World Cup soccer draw in Washington, which came following a stormy 6-week hiatus after Trump broke off bilateral trade talks on sectoral tariffs. Carney told Radio Canada in that closed-door discussion it wasn't a question of Trump wanting to tear up the Canada-U.S.-Mexico free trade deal, despite Trump and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer publicly stating that allowing the deal to expire or negotiating separate bilateral deals are among their options. Rather, Carney said the leaders discussed the process now underway for the trade deal's scheduled review, which he said will be a negotiation. Carney told Quebec's TVA that Trump has made clear in private, in effect, he wants Canada to have a relationship of dependence on the United States, and I don't accept that. Carney reiterated that it is absolutely clear Trump suspended bilateral talks on adjusting American tariffs on Canada's steel, aluminum, and energy sectors because of the anti-tariff ad blitz launched by Premier Doug Ford. Canadian and U.S. negotiators had reached almost a deal on paper in October, Carney said. He stressed that you have to have a signature in order to have a deal. Carney said the Ontario ads had an impact on the president. The president changed his attitude at that moment. It was clear. The Star has learned through 4 sources speaking on condition they not be identified, as they were not authorized to disclose details of any talks, that on October 7, the 2 countries' negotiators had landed on an agreement to adjust Trump-imposed tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and energy, particularly oil. One said it included an agreement on development of the Keystone Pipeline expansion project. Those were the first of what were supposed to be wins before Canadian negotiators hoped to move on to other tougher sectors like autos and lumber ahead of the broader and possibly more difficult discussions on the overall trading relationship with the U.S., under the Canada-U.S.-Mexico talks. Two sources said bilateral talks were also close to a deal on uranium. However, two other insiders said a deal on uranium wasn't close, but was to be part of subsequent deals. It remains possible the collapsed talks could restart, Carney said, but he noted the countries are now closer to the start of what is officially a review of the 2018 Continental Free Trade Deal Trump negotiated in his first term to replace the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. Its replacement is called CUSMA in Canada and USMCA south of the border. Asked by Radio Canada host Patrice Roy if the trilateral deal is in danger, Carney said, "I think the CUSMA is going to change. It's not necessarily in danger, but it is going to change, as are all the deals and trading relationships with the United States. That's why the federal government believes it is necessary to control what it can control, to build Canada and reinforce and find other trade agreements with reliable partners," Carney said, defending his multiple trips abroad. Pressed in the TVA interview about how Trump acted in private with him, Carney said the president is very nice. In private, he asks a lot of questions, he talks a lot, he's funny, and he jokes a lot. Asked if they are good jokes, Carney smiled and said, "It depends, but from time to time." But when asked if Trump jokes about Canada becoming his country's 51st state, as he did when Carney's predecessor, Justin Trudeau, was in office, Carney was circumspect, saying only, "That's not a joke. It's not a joke, never. I don't accept discussions on that." Carney declined to confirm reports in Ottawa, including from star sources, that he will tap financier Mark Wiseman to replace Canada's outgoing ambassador to the U.S., Kirsten Hillman. He said while trade talks are on pause and ahead of the broader negotiation of CUSMA, it's a good time to make the change. When challenged about Wiseman's past criticisms of Canada's supply-managed agricultural sectors, Carney stressed to Radio Canada that "I decide," and underscored his own promise that supply management would be protected. He added Parliament has adopted a law upholding that protection in any trade negotiation. Carney said an ambassador has a role on the negotiating team, but the leader of the team is me, just as the leader of the American team, it's absolutely clear, is the president. Separately, during the Radio Canada interview, Carney denied that he is actively out to woo Conservative MPs to obtain a parliamentary majority that he didn't win in the general election 9 months ago. He said Conservative MPs Chris D'Entremont and Michael Ma approached us about crossing the floor to join his Liberal minority government. They took their decision. They approached us, "Okay, so it's not me. I'm not looking," he said. But at the same time, he added, "It's Parliament. We speak to people." Carney also denied that he might trigger an election in the spring to seek a majority mandate, noting that we're still in a crisis. "I don't think Canadians want an election. We have a job to do," he said. Okay, and I need to remind you one more time, you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the next article is out of Quebec. Man seeks bail amid review of murder conviction. There may have been a miscarriage of justice in 1994 case. And this is by Siddhartha Banerjee. Montreal, a Quebec man whose murder conviction is being reviewed by the federal government, will find out Friday if he could regain his freedom after more than 3 decades behind bars. Daniel Jolivet, now 68, was convicted in 1994 of 4 murders in Brossard, Quebec, south of Montreal. In October, the federal government had announced there were reasonable grounds to believe a miscarriage of justice had occurred in his case and that the Justice Department's Criminal Conviction Review Group would investigate. A bail hearing was held in Montreal on Wednesday in Quebec Superior Court, with Justice Lynn Descartes saying she would rule on Friday afternoon, 33 years after Jolivet was first detained. During the hearing, Jolivet's lawyer, Nicolas Saint-Jacques, outlined the new evidence that had been discovered over 2 decades, which had raised concerns about the reliability of the verdict and the fairness of the trial in the 1990s. The evidence at the trial hinged largely on the testimony of an informant. The informant had said that the morning after the murders, Jolivet had confessed to him at a restaurant that he had killed the 4 people to settle scores relating to drugs and stolen merchandise. But the trial didn't hear that phone records had indicated that Jolivet had been making phone calls at the same time the informant had claimed the accused was confessing at the restaurant. Those phone records and other evidence that had not been disclosed to the defense in the 1990s would have altered Jolivet's strategy at trial, Saint-Jacques said. You have a rather exceptional situation where the Crown acknowledges that there are issues regarding the disclosure of evidence that could have impacted the fairness of the trial or the verdict, Saint-Jacques told the court. In June, the Crown had said it had reasonable grounds to conclude that Jolivet did not receive a fair and equitable trial and that some of the available evidence had not been disclosed to his lawyer. Saint-Jacques has said that while his client has acknowledged committing many crimes, Jolivet has denied murdering anyone, even if doing so would have helped him get parole. And the next article is also in Quebec. A Liberal leader resigns. Rodriguez accused of vote buying during leadership race. It's by Maura Forrest. Montreal. Quebec Liberal Party leader Pablo Rodriguez has resigned amid a crisis involving allegations of vote buying and reimbursed donations during the leadership race he won in June. Rodriguez announced his decision to the Liberal caucus during a virtual meeting held Wednesday afternoon. A member of the legislature present at the meeting, who did not want to speak publicly, confirmed the resignation to the Canadian press. Rodriguez will hold a press conference in Montreal on Thursday morning. The former federal cabinet minister, who had hoped to restore the Liberals to power in next year's election, cast his party as the only viable alternative to the sovereigntist party Quebecos and the only sure way for Quebec to avoid a 3rd referendum on independence in the next 4 years. But he proved unable to overcome the crisis that had consumed his party for the last month. After Quebec's anti-corruption police announced a criminal investigation of the party last week, prominent Liberals began openly calling for Rodriguez to step aside. Many details of the controversy remain unclear, though there are now multiple investigations focused on the leadership race that Rodriguez won with 52% of the vote. Rodriguez's decision to resign comes following a Tuesday report in Le Journal de Montréal claiming that around 20 donors to his leadership campaign received envelopes containing $500 in cash to reimburse their donations during a fundraising event in April. The allegations appear to be a violation of Quebec's Election Act, which states that all contributions must be made voluntarily, without compensation, and for no consideration, and may not be reimbursed in any way. Rodriguez's campaign has said he had no knowledge of money changing hands. All right, the next article is titled Councilors Clash Over Gas Plant Plans. Dispute over the future of Portland's Energy Center. And up top there is a picture of an ad. The Ontario Clean Air Alliance, a long-running advocacy group, ran a post on its website with the caption, "Meet the 4 Toronto councillors who voted for more pollution." And there is the picture of the 4 councillors in this ad and lists their names. This is by Kate Allen. Timbers flared at City Council Wednesday over the city's biggest source of carbon pollution, the Portland's gas plant, as 2 councillors who had been aligned against the plant clashed over plans for its future and over how those plans have been painted by advocates. The conflict centered on councillors Paula Fletcher and Diane Sachs, who share a history of opposing the Portland's Energy Center. The gas plant sits in Fletcher's Ward 14, Toronto Danforth. She fought against its creation in 2006 and has voted since to phase Portland's out. Sachs, the former Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, has spent her career championing environmental causes and likewise voted to phase Portland's out. In fact, Fletcher and Sachs collaborated in 2024 to bring a successful motion to City Council asking to end gas-fired electricity at Portland's by 2035. But on Wednesday, Fletcher called a plan Sachs proposed for Portland's unworkable and a nuisance motion, and suggested Sachs was responsible for a misinformation campaign that targeted Fletcher. Sachs rejected Fletcher's characterization and later told the Star her plan was proper. "I think what I'm asking for is exactly what the city should be doing. I'm not going to get into mudslinging match with my colleague," Sachs said. Fletcher's objections stemmed from a 2-page letter Sachs wrote last month, which Fletcher told council created a firestorm that has not yet stopped. The letter and a motion Sachs brought to the Infrastructure and Environment Committee that encapsulated her requests are an attempt to battle the province's independent electricity system operator, whose proposed plan to meet Toronto's growing energy needs includes the possibility of extending reliance on Portland's. Sachs wanted to ask Toronto Hydro to come up with its own energy supply plan for the city that includes phasing out Portland's by 2035, replacing it with clean energy alternatives. Fletcher said Wednesday that Toronto Hydro doesn't have jurisdiction to create such a plan. In response to questioning from councillors, Toronto Hydro and city staff appeared to agree. At a committee meeting in early December, Fletcher and 3 other councillors voted to refer Sachs's plan to staff for consideration without a date to report back, a move that advocates describe as the black hole of municipal governance, making it unlikely staff will respond. That item and 2 others related to the city's climate strategy attracted a surge of interest from the public. A day after the meeting, the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, a long-running advocacy group, ran a post on its website with the title, "Meet the 4 Toronto councillors who voted for more pollution," along with a photo illustration of Fletcher and the 3 other committee members superimposed over a picture of smokestacks. The post claimed that they voted to stall action on phasing out the polluting Portland's gas plant and shift the city to renewable energy future. The Post called out Fletcher specifically, calling her vote astounding, since she strongly opposed construction of the gas plant in 2006, but now isn't willing to support a key step to see it shut down ASAP. In council chambers Wednesday, Fletcher held up a printout of the Ontario Clean Air Alliance post and blamed Sachs for a nuisance motion, a nuisance letter that created the backlash. In a statement to the Star, Jack Gibbons, the chair of the Alliance, said that the bulletin accurately described what happened and called Fletcher's claims totally false. Fletcher repeated her opposition to Portland's, calling it the most polluting, noxious plant anywhere in the GTA, anywhere. And I want to be very clear on the record that I've always supported the phase-out. Ultimately, both Sachs and Fletcher introduced similar motions at Council, which asked staff to report back on opportunities to shift to more local renewable energy sources, and both passed. Asked if they could work together on this topic in the future since they ultimately advocated for similar positions, both councilors demurred. That is to be determined, Sachs said. You'll have to ask, Sachs, Fletcher said, because since the flack from the motion, she has not spoken out to say that certainly wasn't my intention to target 4 councilors. And I will end with, you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the December 18 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Jane. Thank you for listening.